Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley.
No less.
Most respectable.
Yeah.
Gotta go.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the one and only Dead Authors Panel. I find myself in the enviable position of being the only live person on this panel. One of them, in fact, has been dead for over 150 years, and I'll introduce them to you now. The panel is decomposed. I'm sorry. The panel is, that's not mine. I wish it were, but it's not. The panel is composed of four people. To my immediate right is H.G. Wells, who lived from 1866 to 1946. I think under the circumstances you're permitted to call him Herb. To his immediate right is H.P. Lovecraft, who lived from 1891 to 1937. And on H.P.'s right is Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Frankenstein. Why not Frankenstein? She lived from 1797 to 1851. And we've been deciding two ways that this panel can go. One, to borrow a page from Steve Ellen and make it a kind of meeting of minds in which the panelists hold a discussion amongst themselves, or I think more interestingly, a format which allows you to take part and ask questions of one of these authors or more, depending on your familiarity with their works. I would like, in my capacity as moderator, to ask the first question. It gives me an opportunity to do a kind of reverse procedure to a question that I often ask authors when I talk to them, which is what other authors have influenced you. In this case, I'll be able to say, whom have you influenced? And it will be interesting, now that they've been resurrected, to discover, we've been joined.
Pardon me, sir. I'm the late Hugo Gernsback.
The late Hugo Gernsback, in some ways the granddaddy of us all, the author of Ralph 24C41 Plus, has just joined us. 124C. Who is that man? Sorry, I thought it was A.E. Van Vogt. So what I'm going to do is ask each of the authors who are with us now to perhaps have some insights on current authors whom they have influenced. Herb, H.G. Wells.
I'm usually
just about everybody.
I'm usually addressed as H.G. By the way, in my youth I was called Bertie. We got rid of that, however. I think since I've been dead, my principal complaint, I believe, is that I haven't really influenced very many people. There's been an entire American school of whippersnappers arise since the 1920s, and every one of them behaves as if they never read a thing I wrote. I can hardly look at this with equanimity or even composure. Further, the influence that I have had on some people in England seems to have been devoted entirely to catastrophes, and I really didn't think that way at all while I was alive. Nevertheless, of course, being dead, I suppose you can't complain if other people disagree with you. What do you have to say?
But if I may just ask Tommy, isn't it true that you once said that we are now, I've forgotten the exact quote, but we are now in a race between education and disaster?
I did, but I thought disaster won.
All right, let's hear from H.P. Lovecraft. First of all, Mr. Lovecraft, I've always wanted to know, what do the initials stand for? Don't you tell me, I want him to tell me.
Well, they actually stand for Howard and Phillips. Phillipses were a very old New England family, quite a respectable New England family. I was brought up for first years, at any rate, in the house of my wealthy and cultured grandfather, Whipple Van Buren Phillips. a most respectable citizen of Providence, Rhode Island.
Where's that?
Where, one might ask, where is this place? Providence. Providence is near Boston. And hopefully at least 200 miles away from that ghastly metropolis of steaming mongrel flesh called New York City. Babylon of foreign races. Well, I began life in Providence, and I am a descendant of the Phillipses, a very old New England family, and a most respectable one. I'm a Yankee gentleman myself.
Would you say, Mr. Lovecraft, that your works have influenced any contemporary authors?
Well, most contemporary authors are not to my taste. There's a sort of horrible realism going around these days. Interest in psychological analysis of raw and disgusting emotions, and portrayals of the most revolting things on the screen, like people kissing and taking their clothes off, and romance. I myself have described rotting corpses which rise from the grave, but I never messed around with that disgusting romance stuff. So I don't suppose I could be said to have much influence on most people today, but there are a few who are writing good, horrible stories, and I might claim to have some influence on them, and some pretty clean fantasists too. There was, I remember in Providence when I was living with my aunties, I was an aged antiquarian in Providence. I've always been an aged antiquarian all of my life. There was this young fella came down visit me called H. Warner Munn. Very young man. I feel like his spiritual grandfather. And I think I had some influence on him. And then there's old Frank Belknap Wong. I think I can claim to have given him some pretty good themes. And then there's my dear friend Clark Ashton Smith, who appears in some of my stories as the dreaded Egyptian pharaoh Clark Ashton. And then there's that feller Robert Bloch, but he's done a bit too well for me. He's gone commercial. He went and made a film. There's some pretty good effects in that film he got from me, like the time they turn around the chair and there's old Granny all rotted, and but I didn't like that part where the lady was in a bath with no clothes on. Well, she got murdered, though. That's something to say for it. That's redeeming artistic merit. Bloch chopped her up. Then there's that chap Fritz Lieber. He's done pretty well, too. I taught him everything he knows, but look, he's gone commercial. He sells all his stories. And paperback. No, I influenced them in their time, but they all went commercial. So they've become part of the modern scene, but I'm an aged Yankee gentleman. In fact, I really live in the 18th century, and I've written a lot of rhyming couplets to prove that. And I'm sorry to say that all of you people really seem rather unreal because you were born after the American Revolution. But I'd like to just say one final remark, that I'm very proud to be able to address a Canadian audience today because you have never rebelled against your rightful king. It is a disgrace of my fellow countrymen. The traitors of Lexington and Concord, they all should have been shot. But here I am under the rule of the Queen. Got a lot of foreigners in, though, but Anglo-Saxon stock is endangered, but at least you've got a queen. Thanks.
Mr. Lovecraft, I think I would have liked to have met you in your earlier incarnation. Our next speaker is Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Wollstonecroft, sorry, he didn't say anything. Ms. Shelley, do you have any thoughts on contemporary authors whom might have been influenced by your style?
I'm not really sure of the propriety of claiming to influence anyone, sir. However, I would like to believe that I have made it easier for women everywhere to support themselves by their own endeavors. Also, I think I may reasonably claim to be the first person who invented the idea of the creator who was destroyed by his creation. And also, in my novel, The Last Man, the world destroyed by catastrophe.
That's all you're going to say at the moment?
At the moment, sir.
Okay. Let's go next to Hugo Gernsback. And Mr. Gernsback, you were late in more ways than one.
Yes, there are several.
But I did make a reference earlier to your perhaps being the granddaddy of all this activity that's going on now. You must have some thoughts on contemporary science fiction.
Well, yes, indeed. Your Your question, I believe, was which contemporary writers have I influenced, and I must say that I have influenced them all in a very basic way. I gave them the means to earn a living. I gave them a place to publish their wares. I started the entire field of magazine science fiction, sir.
I think it must also, though, be charitably said, especially after having tried to read Ralph 124C41 plus,
An excellent story, if I do say so.
that although its imaginative powers are undoubted, its writing style is very bad.
Well, of course, you're entitled to your opinion, sir, but my ideas of science fiction were perhaps a bit different than those of the writers of today. I must agree with Mr. Lovecraft that much of modern writing is not exactly to my taste. It's entirely too romantic and too psychological. There's very little hard science involved. Science fiction is supposed to teach people science in an interesting way.
All right, now I'm going to give an opportunity for the audience to ask questions of the panel, but it occurs to me that perhaps someone on the panel might like to respond to something said by one of the other authors. If not, does someone in the audience have a question? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to ask Mrs. Shelley why she changed her name to Wollstonecroft.
Oh, in 1820, George IV became King of England, and in his coronation he refused to allow his wife, Princess Caroline, to be crowned queen. Shortly thereafter, he started divorce proceedings against her, claiming that she had committed adultery. He himself was a most adulterous prince, and I was not at all convinced that Princess Caroline was guilty of adultery. I was very indignant. I remembered my mother, Mary Wollstonecroft, and her vindication of the rights of women. And to commemorate her memory, I adopted her surname as my middle name. From then on till the end of my life, I was known as Mary Wollstonecroft Shelley.
Does that answer your question? Sir.
Mr. Wells,
Yeah?
Mr. Gernsback said that the purpose of science fiction was to teach science in an interesting way. Now, my reading of your works leads me to believe that you had a different approach to it. And would you agree with Mr. Gernsback, or do you have a different feeling about the purpose of science fiction?
Well, I believe I made it clear while I was alive, which was actually not all that long ago, that I was a very considerable supporter of everything that education could do. And furthermore, my own past could really be understood in the context of biological evolution. That was the first thing that I studied. I was born, I think, even by Mr. Lovecraft's standards here, rather poor. And it was not until I actually became a scholarship student of one kind or another, and not even a particularly good one, that I acquired any independence whatever. Furthermore, during the middle part of my life, say around 1920, I was a very well-known popular educator, so that my support of education is unquestioned. Nevertheless, the particular didactic approach that I used in my novels was certainly not like Mr. Gernsback's. For one thing, I didn't know how most of the damn things worked. This has always been a difficulty with people who write science fiction, I suppose. And after all, I was a true Victorian, and it was even a little bit disgraceful for me to know how things worked. Sometimes consider, for example, my early scientific romances, which I imagine are the ones that you're talking about. I gather you're not really asking me about my later novels.
Not about your present-day social novels.
Yes, well, those scientific romances are not very technological. However, they do have a lot to do with certain kinds of technical ideas connected with evolution. The time machine, for example, is an evolutionary thesis. You have a split. You say that society evolves in a particular way. You have basically it evolves into people that eat and people who are eaten. And there have been some attempts to make that into a political thesis, but this is not true. It's an evolutionary thesis. It's much closer to a scientific hypothesis than it is to something Marxian or something like that. Now, when you get to something like the War of the Worlds, why that has very little technology to it. Then, when I did get technological again was in something like, say a modern utopia. And in that case, there was a great deal of talk about the social technology of a country. I think my answer to your question is that I believe that a fictioneer could indulge in social technology, yes. But no, I didn't believe that people should learn things like physics or biology. I was educated in biology, but you never see any biology in my stories. Mr. Gernsback here was educated in electronics and won't shut up about it in his stories.
Well, I began quite early, sir. It was, after all, at the age of 13 that I was installing telephones and communication systems, primitive then as they were. They're not anything like what we have today.
Yes.
I would like to ask a question of Mr. Wells having to do with the film treatment of his stories. Many of your stories have been made into films, not that many since your death. By the way, Mr. Wells died at the age of 80, and I think we owe him a special round of applause for coming here in his advanced state of decrepitude. And a lot of his stories have been made into films, and I wonder what he thinks of the filmic treatment of his imagination.
Well, as a matter of fact, I wrote 2 of the treatments, so that brings up a rather special case. And more than half directed one of them. That thing that we did with Menzies really took most of my advice, I think.
This is Things to Come.
That was Things to Come. And some of you may even have read the script of Things to Come, which I published separately. I actually wrote a thing called The Shape of Things to Come and something else called Things to Come. And Things to Come is the script of the movie. And it is about 1/3 longer than the film. You might even be interested to find out what I actually meant when I put that movie in there. Yes, the film was severely cut toward the end. And the film was originally intended to have an early section in which the Second World War began, and I almost hit that dead on, as I recall. I had it coming in something like something like Christmas 38, as I remember. No, that's right. It was Christmas 40. I missed it on the other side. That's correct. And well, that was darn close. However, then I had an idea that didn't come to fruition. That is, that the world would then descend into barbarism. I admit that's a pet idea of mine. And when in doubt, I always used to like to get the world back to barbarism. Gives you a bit more leeway in your plotting, for one thing.
Are you sure, sir, that it has not already happened?
I just put the date around 1790 for that. Not wearing knee breeches then.
That reminds me, where is Mr. Howard?
There's a man at the
Mr.
back with
Moderator?
a question.
I'd like to ask Mrs. Shelley what her opinion of Lord Byron is.
Oh, well, since his death, I haven't really liked to speak ill of him. He was a friend in some respects, incredibly tight with his money.
I'd like to ask Mrs. Shelley a question having to do with today's Gothic novels, and does she see some kind of a themic link between her work and those novels?
The modern Gothic novel really deals with, I believe that the modern Gothic novel deals with a young woman who arrives at a castle at sunset, and it meets 2 men, one of whom is a good guy and the other one is not, and she does not find out until the last chapter which is which. I see no resemblance whatsoever between that type of novel and my masterpiece, my first published novel, Frankenstein, which deals with a young man who does not arrive at a castle at twilight or at any other time.
I think you've answered the question brilliantly.
Mr. Moderator, I would
Yes.
like to respond to a previous question as well, having to do with the works of Mr. Wells. And as perhaps many persons here today know, when I started Amazing Stories in April 1926, I relied heavily in the first few months on the works of Mr. Wells.
And didn't pay me.
Well, I have a reputation, sir, for being rather slow to pay.
In this
Perhaps
case,
after this discussion you could see me. Also, I relied heavily on the works of Edgar Allan Poe and Jules Verne. However, although Mr. Wells' works are not overly technological, I, of course, still enjoyed them, and I owed a lot of my interest in the field, in science fiction, to having read his stories. And I would like to point out...
What was that word you used?
Science fiction, sir, the correct name for the field. I would like to point out to Mr. Lovecraft that one of Mr. Wells' stories, The War of the Worlds, in radio adaptation in 1938, frightened 10 million Americans out of their wits. That should gladden your heart, sir.
Well, that's a rather large public, actually. I'd like to say that although I dare say you have done some service to those who wish to make money by their writings, I haven't much to do with that. In fact, I have never written for money. I'm a gentleman, and the true role of a gentleman is not to work for a living. It is to simply live and have certain impressions and contemplate beauty. I wrote only to please myself. Only to please myself as a gentleman. I wrote stories now and then, though they weren't real. They were just amateur efforts. The aristocrat does not have a profession. The aristocrat does things now and then to please himself. And I offered these stories to a small group of friends, and I sometimes sent them out to the vulgar commercial world, and especially that man Farnsworth Wright, who actually refused some of them. And when he refused them, I just put them in a drawer. I threw them away. They went in the furnace, or they went to light something up, and wasn't for my friend August Derleth, almost nothing I wrote would have been published. And I remember when Wright rejected my long, rambling manuscript of The Mountains of Madness, which was typed single-spaced. And I don't type, I'm not any good with machines. I live, after all, in 1750, so I couldn't do much with that typewriter. When he rejected this, I was completely crushed and resolved never to write for the vile public again. A gentleman can't afford that. Of course, my capital got smaller every year, so I was considering cyanide at the end after leading a genteel existence.
You'd have done well to fight for the independence of Greece, like my friend Lord Byron.
Well, sounds a little scary to me. You have to fight the independence of Greece, you might have to go out in the daytime. I spent most of my time going out at night. This is one of my very few appearances in the daytime.
We have a question at the back.
Yes.
Sorry, the standing man. You are standing, aren't you?
I was wondering if any of the members of the Dead Authors panel plan to attend Minneapolis in '73.
Well, as you know, I invented that particular conveyance originally, and so I suppose I will have to be there. It's going to be an obligation.
Minneapolis is west of Springfield, Massachusetts.
Some ways.
I don't think I'll be there, no.
Now I saw, yes, the man in the red sweater.
Mr. Lovecraft, in most of your stories, the horrors described are usually unnameable, unthinkable, unutterable, etc. And although I enjoy them, I get a little tired of that. I'm wondering why you were so loath to describe them in slightly more detail.
Well, now that I look back on everything I've written, I've realized it's mere trash.
It is my opinion, sir, that all things in nature are describable.
Well, first of all, I am not very good at a number of things. In fact, I'm not very good at most things. That's why I'm a gentleman. I decided to be that rather early in life, and I found out I wasn't very good at many things. Now, I'm no good at characters. I'm no good at dialogue. I wouldn't have any romance in my stories. And I'm not much good at action either. So that leaves only one thing, and that's atmosphere. So I worked on atmosphere. And atmosphere is made with adjectives. Adjectives like eldritch, encyclopean, paleologian, and horrible, and that sort of thing. Well, I worked on the adjectives. But if you describe the thing, where's the atmosphere? It's got to be something vaguely there that horrifies you. You see it all. What's there to be frightened of? You know, I really like New England landscapes. But when I really describe those landscapes, I don't describe anything except a few trees and a dark brooding hill with a couple of pillars on top from ancient Indian ceremonies. It's the mysterious horror that lurks behind the landscape. And if I described the landscape, there wouldn't be any horror behind it, because all true horror proceeds from the unconscious. And boy, is there an unconscious in my stories, which I wouldn't even want to talk about. There are some nameless abysses that should not be looked into by any mortal man. See me tomorrow afternoon.
The man with the check shirt at the back.
Mr. Lovecraft, your father died when you were rather young. A close relationship with your mother. How do you feel this affected your later writing and your marriage?
Well, first of all, my father died, contrary to all the rumors, he died of overwork. He did not go mad of syphilis. I assure you, he did not. He was in a mental hospital, but it was a breakdown produced by overwork as a traveling salesman. Well, he was a very dashing fellow. Now, my mother, my dear, dear, dear mother, and I had a very close relationship. In fact, my mother was rather peculiar. She said things, she wouldn't let me go outside, and she wouldn't play with other children. She said I was too sick to go to school. She wanted me to be a girl, so she used to dress me up in girls' clothes and do my hair in ringlets. But she also used to go around saying to people that I was so hideous that I hid from everyone and did not like to walk upon the streets where people could gaze at me, because I could not bear to have people look upon my awful face.
Oh, my.
And she would never touch me. Never touched me. And you know, it's true, nobody among my progenitors was as rotten looking as I am. I am a sort of parody or caricature, facially, of my mother and maternal uncle. And, well, in my last year of high school, I had a nervous breakdown, and for 5 years, I spent all my time inside, sitting around in a bathrobe and slippers in my mother's apartment. And once I horrified my poor mother, I went and volunteered for the Army. But she got the doctor to say that I was too sick to ever be in the Army. And so I stayed home. In fact, I never slept away a single night until I was 30 years old. When I went up to see Lord Dunsany in Boston, some friends actually persuaded me to stay in their house for the night. Well, my poor mother went mad, too. You know, she used to lurk outside the house at dusk, grabbing passers-by and telling them about the strange monsters that used to lurk in the bushes.
Did you have any relatives that didn't lurk?
Whipple, Van Buren Phillips never lurked. He was a most respectable Yankee gentleman. But then my wife, Sonia, came along. You know, all my life I've been compulsively prejudiced against all these foreigners. But I married a Jewish Russian woman. That's pretty strange. And she took me to New York, and she mothered me for 2 years. But then she had to go and get a job somewhere else because I was a gentleman. And I was so glad to get back to my aunties in Providence. And once I got there, I pulled down the blind, and I slept all day, and I was up all night. And when I worked, you see, in the daytime, which was very rare, I used to pull down the blind and turn on the electric light bulb so you could pretend it was night.
Oh,
I think that my mother and my aunties had quite a strong influence on my life. In fact, I would say that my one foray into the world, into that steaming abyss of mongrel flesh, New York City, was caused by that woman, Sonia, who was very nice, but she took me away and took me to New York, and I couldn't stand it there. And when I went back to Providence, I gave all that up, and I lived with my aunties for the rest of my life. And very few people in Providence knew me because I didn't see many people, because I only went out at nighttime to look at graveyards and old colonial architecture. And when I finally died, probably as a result of my great care in only spending $1.25 a week on food, there were 4 people who went to my funeral, and that was all. Nobody knew I lived in Providence. I think I stayed home quite a bit with my aunties, but they took good care of me.
Incidentally, Mr. Lovecraft died at the age of 46.
I liked it.
I was just telling the audience that you died at the age of 46. You must have been in ill health.
Well, actually, I was a 6-foot-tall, chalk-white representative of the Nordic race. I identified myself with the Berserk killers who conquered all of Europe. I kept my face chalk-white by never going out in the daytime and getting a tan, and by never eating any food that would bring color into my cheeks.
You were very fond of ice cream, I believe, hearing.
Yes, I was really one few expeditions at a time when that H. Warner Moon, that young fellow, would come along, and we'd go out in the town and we'd just have a wild time at an ice cream parlor. I ate 36 different flavors of ice cream once. I felt great afterwards.
Oh, my.
We have a questioner in the back. Yes, you.
It's for Mrs. Shelley. I'm sure this is a very sensitive matter to you now, but I've always wanted to ask how you felt. Do you think that Percy Bysshe committed suicide or did he drown by natural means in the Adriatic Ocean?
Oh, well, that is really a ridiculous question. Of course his death was accidental. He was a young man. He had everything to live for. He had a strong sense of responsibility. He would not willingly have left me and his child to manage as best we could. Of course, it was an accidental death.
I wonder, Mrs. Shelley, if you have any thoughts on Mr. Lovecraft's rather convoluted psychological makeup.
I feel extremely sorry for Mr. Lovecraft. I feel that I had thought that my life was not an easy one, but his life was so much worse than mine that there's no comparison whatsoever. At least I had the bliss of happy years with Shelley, and I did have one surviving child who was a great comfort to me, and a wonderful daughter-in-law. I really had a beautiful life in comparison with Mr. Lovecraft.
Oh, but I had many, many happy years with my aunts in Providence.
I think that's
poor lady had
very
me put
sad.
in a madhouse.
Oh, very sad.
I must say I feel rather sorry for Mr. Lovecraft as well. I hardly think it is necessary to be unemployed to be a gentleman. In 1929, immediately before that disaster in which I lost control of Amazing Stories, my brother Sidney and I were earning $1,000 a week. Certainly a good living for that time. And yet, I considered myself a gentleman. I examined menus at restaurants with my monocle, which I seem to have misplaced today. And I certainly never hesitated to send back a steak that was not properly done or wine that was slightly off. And I think those as well are characteristics of a gentleman.
Well, gentlemen may work, but no one would give me a job, so I was a gentleman who didn't work. I simply lived and had aesthetic impressions.
My own feeling is that a gentleman is not quite so concerned with his gentlemanliness. Lord Byron was the man I knew who was most concerned, most emotionally involved with his own aristocratic background. And I happen to know that he grew up in the most miserable circumstances up until he his great uncle unexpectedly died, and he became Lord Byron. Nobody could have predicted that during his early years. He lived a life of extreme poverty and insecurity, and consequently, when he first made money from his writing, he gave it all away. He couldn't accept the fact that of earning money. He felt that it compromised his gentlemanliness.
Indeed.
I feel that there's something very strange about gentlemen who are so emotionally concerned about it.
All right, we have someone, yes, this lady here.
Mrs. Shelley, how do you feel about the film versions of your creation?
Oh, I never go to the movies. Never. I've heard about them, and I feel that they don't do emphasis to the spiritual qualities of my book.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Mrs. Shelley. I'd like to know if you were actually going to dialectic against science in Frankenstein.
Well, I didn't really plan it that way, but I believe that could be interpreted that way.
How do you interpret it?
I was concerned about the meaning of life and how it could be developed and whether it would be good if we were able to create life. The whole thing came out of a sort of a waking trance. I don't know whether you've heard, but during the summer of 1815, Lord Byron and his doctor, Dr. Polidori, and my stepsister, Claire Claremont, and Shelley and myself were in Switzerland at Lake Geneva. And we got very much into the occult with table tapping, and it had a bad effect upon some of the members of our group. Claire and Shelley in particular became quite hysterical from time to time. So as a way of expressing this interest in the occult and at the same time not quite terrifying ourselves so much, Lord Byron suggested that we have a contest amongst us to see which could write the finest story of the supernatural. From that, Dr. Polidori wrote The Vampire, which I believe is the first of the vampire novels. And I was concerned for some time because I could not think of a proper story to write. And then one night we were all discussing life. We were having a philosophical discussion about whether it would ever be possible to create life. And that night I had this strange dream and I saw the monster quite clearly. And the next day I started to write that book. I forget what the question was. I'm sorry.
I think that flowing out of your answer is another question, which is a sequel to something somebody asked here about the treatment of the monster in film. The fact is that the film and television Frankenstein is a different beast altogether than the novel Frankenstein.
Yes, I would say so. From what I've seen pictures of Boris Karloff, even though I have not seen the movie. I agree with Mr. Lovecraft. I feel that what is not described is more horrible to the reader than what is described, because the reader's imagination enters in and presents what's horrifying to him personally.
Okay, we have a questioner back here.
Yes, I believe, Mrs. Shelley, you admitted once in your life that you found being in a graveyard a very moving experience. I wonder if you still do.
Well, the graveyard was dear to me because I used to lie on my mother's grave for hours and hours and hours, from the time I was quite a small child up until I went away with Shelley. It was a way of getting away from my stepmother, but it gave me a feeling of not being so orphaned.
This panel is scheduled to run to 3:45. Unless you have objections, I would suggest that we give it about 10 more minutes. Do you have objections? No objections? Let's go about 10 more minutes. Do we have yes, sir.
I was just wondering, Mr. Lovecraft, do you really believe there might be eldritch Cyclopean cities and eldritch gods like Cthulhu and Dagon?
Absolutely not. Ridiculous. I am a scientific materialist and a skeptic. Of course, I believe in Aryan supremacy, but everything I believe in is scientific. And I'm sure that none of those things exist. And what's more, I wrote a book with Harry Houdini to show that, I can't remember whether it got published or not, probably one of those manuscripts got put in the furnace, to show that none of this table tipping or mystery stuff, it's all fraud. The Blavatsky thing, it's all fraud. I don't believe a word of it. I just like to say that I think we skeptics, we people who don't believe in anything, write the best stories about supernatural horror. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm so repressed. But anyway, I think I'd do it better because I don't believe in a word of it.
Likewise, sir, I also am a skeptic where it comes to the supernatural, and in fact, in a number of my magazines, for several years, I offered a $10,000 prize to anyone who could prove communication with the so-called spirit world, and no one ever collected.
I would like to ask Mr. Lovecraft, what exactly does a hideous footprint look like?
In the Dunwich Horror, it was invisible, had hundreds of legs, and they're all the size of barrels. You could see the trees bending, the vegetation being uprooted, but there was nothing there except a stench that was like nothing stinks in this universe. But in the Shadow Out of Time, there were prints of 5 toes in the dust, deep in the Cyclopean corridors, eons old, the Paleologian horrors, far under the earth in Australia. And you can just imagine what amorphous, semi-material, semi-liquid, invisible creature might have made those, because it's a lot better to show the footprint than it is to show the thing. It's scarier.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Lovecraft what you think of the use of your myth that was in the Illuminatus trilogy.
Excuse me? That's a recent publication, I believe.
Yes, it's fairly recent, about a few years. The trilogy by Robert Downey Wilson and Robert Shea.
Oh, yes, I've had a look at that. It's interesting. It's pretty interesting. I didn't read it all, and then there's this Colin Wilson chap who did a bit in the Mind Parasites. And Durlis did a bit. So I'll tell you what about those fellas. They aren't really crazy. Okay? They're all perfectly sane, even though they're trying to put it on. Now, I say I don't believe in those things. In some way, deep inside, I do believe in them. And I don't think that Durlis fella did. And I don't think the Illuminatus fella did. I think they're all perfectly sane young men who should go out and get jobs and play useful roles, but they just aren't crazy enough.
They're not gentlemen either, are they?
No, they aren't gentlemen. It's too bad. I mean, they work, and they make money, and they succeed. You see, I've got a confession to make. Now, in my last years, I gave up all my racism, and I became an admirer of FDR, and I believed the world would be saved by the New Deal, and I even got to be a socialist. But I'll tell you, I am a failure in life. I failed at everything. I failed at marriage. I failed at writing. I made a mess of everything. All I did was live with my aunties. Well, I hated all those goddamn people who came over here from Europe, all those Jews and Ukrainians and Poles and Finns who came over here and made good. They made me feel inferior. So I hated them all. What I really hated was myself. I thought I was disgusting, but I claimed to think they were disgusting, see? And that's why I'm a true gentleman. From New England. I'll tell you another thing. Doug Collins is the same way. Only I know it and he doesn't.
Mr. Wells, I have the impression you were on the verge of saying something. Am I wrong?
Oh, I did have something to say about these unnameable creatures and monsters. A friend of mine once told me that the trouble with an unimaginable horror is that it always looks a little bit like an octopus and a little bit like a burnt leather sofa cushion advertising the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. and it seems to me that is about my opinion.
Let's have one more question. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Gernsback.
Yes,
How do
madam.
you feel about having a Science Fiction Achievement Award being back?
I was very pleased to have been involved in starting this field, and I think I deserve to have something of that sort named after me.
I gather you didn't contribute any money to it, however.
Incidentally, I think it should be noted that Mr. Gernsback's delinquency in payment, where Mr. Wells is concerned, set something of a record. It's over 40 years. I expect they'll be meeting after this panel. Our four dead authors were impersonated in real life by, on my immediate right, Ed Hutchings. Next to him is Mason Harris. Mary Shelley is really Eleanor Busby. And Hugo Gernsback is Al Betz. Thank you very much.
You were super.
Tomorrow afternoon, I'll tell you all about what's in those horrible monsters. Detail.